Hi, Mark Donovan here, and today I'm going to be going over the topic of best practices when flying at or around uncontrolled airports or non-towered airports. I'll be going over specifically regulations and advisory circulars associated with flying at these types of airports so that hopefully you can learn something and fly more safely when you're operating at these types of airports. So stay tuned. Okay, let's get into it. Best practices for flying at an uncontrolled airport. All right, so let's talk a little bit about mid-air collisions per the Airplane Flying Handbook. So per the NTSB, most probable cause of mid-air collisions is the pilot failing to see and avoid other traffic. That's why we always say see and avoid traffic is absolutely critical. Your head needs to be outside the plane when you're flying, particularly VFR. Mid-air collisions generally occur during daylight hours. 56% of the accidents occur in the afternoon, 32% in the morning, and 2% occur at night, dusk, or dawn. Most mid-air collisions occur under good visibility. A mid-air collision is most likely to occur between two aircraft going in the same direction. The majority of pilots involved in mid-air collisions are not on a flight plan, and nearly all accidents occur at or near uncontrolled airports and at altitudes below 1,000 feet. And pilots of all experience levels are involved in these types of accidents. So bottom line is they usually happen on nice days, close to the ground, and mostly at uncontrolled airports, and the traffic going the same way. And you can see there in the chart to the right, again, coming right out of the Airplane Flying Handbook, you can see the percentage of where the accidents occur in the pattern. Interestingly enough, you see on final, on the runway, 34% respectively. A significant portion happen really right on that departure leg or final approach at the airport. Two examples of accidents relating to this type of situation. The mid-air collision in Tucson, Arizona that recently happened per this filming of this video occurred on February 19th, 2025, involving a Cessna 172 and a Lancer. Basically, it looks like the two planes were in the pattern, doing pattern work, and the Lancer, being a much faster aircraft, ended up coming up behind the Skyhawk on final. And when the Skyhawk was starting to do its touch and go, the Lancer hit it. Unfortunately, it killed the two people in the Lancer, and fortunately for the people in the Skyhawk, they were able to fly the pattern, come back and land safely, and nobody was injured in that aircraft. And looking at the ADSB data of those two aircraft during that flight that day, that data seems to back up the observations that we're seeing for that accident. Another accident that happened maybe a year or so ago involved a Civil Air Patrol 206 and a Global Swift aircraft out of Minden, Nevada. Two aircraft collided with one another in the traffic pattern, causing the loss of life in the Globe Swift aircraft. The main takeaways from that accident were the importance of proper traffic flow entry into the pattern and the importance of radio communications. There were some issues there. And also the benefits of having ADSB out and in operating in the aircraft. So we're going to get right into it now in terms of the FAA regulations and recommendations at uncontrolled airports. The FAA provides several documents or resources for describing proper procedures for entering a traffic pattern, flying in the traffic pattern, and radio operations at or near the non-towered airports. One of the best ones to go take a look at is the Advisory Circular 90-66C, Non-Towered Airport Flight Operations. Also 14 Code of Federal Regulations 91.126, operating on or in the vicinity of a Class G airspace or airport. And then 14 Code of Federal Regulations 91.113, right-of-way rules. Then there's also the Airplane Flying Handbook, which I just showed you some statistical data that they had collected. The Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, or PHAK, and then the Aeronautical Information Manual, AIM. So there's numerous resources available from the FAA that if you study those and review these documents, you can be a safer pilot and feel more comfortable flying at uncontrolled airports. I'm going to go over most of the key salient points of these documents in this session today. So operating on or in the vicinity of a Class G airspace or airport, per 91.126b for non-towered airports, each pilot of an airplane must make all turns of that airplane to the left unless the airport displays approved light signals or visual markings indicating the turn should be made to the right, in which case the pilot must make the turns to the right. So something like looking at the chart supplement or airplane flight directory or airport flight directory as it used to be called, that would tell you if it's a right-hand traffic pattern. You can also see identified on the sectional charts. Also, each pilot of a helicopter or powered parachute must avoid the flow of fixed-wing aircraft. Going on, per AC or Advisory Circular 90-66C in the Airplane Flying Handbook for non-towered airports, non-towered airport traffic patterns are always entered at pattern altitude, roughly 1,000 feet above ground. For the most part, that's what it is for most airports. Again, typically 1,000 feet AGL, above ground level. Pattern entry depends upon the direction of arrival. The preferred method for entry is to enter on a 45 to the downwind leg of the pattern at about midfield. So there's a couple alternate traffic pattern entries for uncontrolled airports, particularly if you're coming in on the upwind leg. One method is to announce your intentions and cross over midfield at least 500 feet above pattern altitude, and then teardrop down in to come in at the 45 on the downwind leg side. However, if large aircraft or turbine aircraft are operating in the vicinity of the airport, it's best to remain 2,000 feet AGL so as not to conflict with their traffic pattern. Again, once you're well clear of the pattern, 2 miles out, no more than that, or approximately that, the pilot should scan carefully and then do that teardrop turn, descending down to pattern altitude on that 45-degree angle onto the downwind leg. So my thoughts on this technique: that's fine for a high-wing aircraft, not so fine for a low-wing aircraft, because as you're doing that teardrop turn to the right, your left wing is up and you can't see any traffic on the 45. Hopefully you've scanned that before you made the turn, but just in general, it's creating a large blind spot for you when you're teardropping down on a low-wing airplane. There is a second alternate method. This is, again, involving crossing midfield, but you cross at midfield pattern altitude, and you basically turn a midfield crosswind to a midfield downwind. This technique shouldn't be used if you're in a pattern traffic that's busy. My thoughts again on this are ideal for low-wing aircraft, not so necessary to do for a high-wing aircraft. Moving on, collision avoidance. Per the Airplane Flying Handbook, when near an airport, pilots should continue to scan for other aircraft and check blind spots. Your eyes should be outside that cockpit most of the time, 80-90% of the time, not fiddling around on your avionics or spending too much time on your instruments. Look outside for the traffic versus trying to find it on your ADS-B screen, for example. High-wing airplanes have restricted visibility above, while low-wing airplanes have limited visibility below. So when those two types of aircraft get in the vicinity of the airport, coming in on a downwind, there's a higher risk that they won't see each other and potentially conflict with each other and have a mid-air collision. So watch out for those scenarios. Banking from time to time is also a good thing to do when you're in the pattern. We're not talking huge banks, but just raising a wing a few degrees so that you can potentially see from a blind spot that you might have had when you were in level flight. Also, if you can, look to the rear of the plane and make sure that there's nobody coming in behind you, especially if you hear traffic says it's behind you or reporting it's coming in on the 45 and you're already on the downwind or just started the downwind. Pay attention to the backside. Now, to be clear, the FAA does not regulate traffic pattern entry, only traffic pattern flow. So when entering a traffic pattern at an airport without an operating control tower, inbound pilots are expected to observe other aircraft already in the pattern and to conform to the traffic pattern in use. So sometimes I see this at the airport I fly out of, where people may be flying the traffic pattern, left-hand traffic pattern for runway 8, because the winds were slightly favoring it. Some would say, well, the winds are only blowing 4 or 5 knots, and the common runway is runway 26 at 5 knots or less. So instead of pushing it and going against the grain of the flow, you should conform to the traffic pattern. If you feel like it could be an issue for you from a safety perspective, you could call out to the traffic, reporting the winds may have changed and suggesting maybe they change their flow to the other runway. But again, your goal or your responsibility is to effectively conform to the flow of the traffic pattern that's in use. Traffic pattern entry and turn direction information is provided by using the airport's remarks or the chart supplement, the AIM, the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, or 90-66C. From the VFR sectional chart, a non-towered airport will indicate a right traffic pattern with an RP indication on it. That means right-hand traffic pattern. Again, part of your pre-flight responsibility under 91.103 is to review all information associated with that airport that you're taking off and landing at. So again, pull out the chart supplement and look at the details there if you need to. Also, there could be some NOTAMs or something in the AIM that might also be relevant for you to take a look at. But particularly the NOTAMs, they can pop up suddenly. That's why the whole purpose of them is. And so it's important that you're aware of any possible changes in the pattern that hasn't been updated in the sectional chart or the chart supplement. When entering the traffic pattern at an airport without an operating control tower, inbound pilots are expected to observe other aircraft already in the pattern and conform again to the traffic pattern in use. At a non-towered airport and other than instrument conditions, the FAA does not recommend that the pilot execute a straight-in approach for landing when there are other aircraft in the traffic pattern. I see this all the time. People will call 10, 12, 15-mile finals. Then sometimes they're not on an instrument approach, not even a practice instrument approach. They just don't want to enter the pattern. They just want to come straight in. Technically, that's not proper, and the FAA doesn't recommend it. So if you can avoid the straight-in approaches, try to fly the pattern. I know it's tougher on higher speed aircraft to fly the pattern at a slower speed, but maybe they should spend some time practicing in the pattern a little bit to control their airspeed a little bit better so they can actually fly in the pattern. Fly the standard traffic pattern. Arriving aircraft should enter the airport's traffic pattern at traffic pattern altitude. This includes on the 45, not just in the downwind, to be at that 1,000 feet above ground, and avoid, again, the straight-in approaches for landing to mitigate the risk of mid-air collisions. A little bit more now into the Advisory Circular 90-66C. 9.5 section, prior to takeoff, VFR or IFR traffic verification and communications. Communication at non-towered airports is absolutely critical, and it's also critical for those towered airports where the control tower is closed at certain times, particularly in the evening. Pilots are reminded that in these cases, surveillance of the traffic by the air traffic controller is removed in those situations where the tower is closed, and so it's really up to the pilot to take on the added responsibility of effectively working at an uncontrolled or flying at an uncontrolled airport. So pre-takeoff communications. On the airport CTAF, communicate and coordinate your takeoff intentions with aircraft inbound and in the traffic pattern and announce the runway you're going to be using, the direction of flight on departure, straight out departure, departure to the left-hand departure out to the south or whatever, or whether or not you intend to remain in the traffic pattern. Coordinate the takeoff with other traffic in the traffic pattern, traffic inbound for landing, or traffic on a straight-in approach to any of the airport's runways. All traffic within a 10-mile radius of a non-towered airport or part-time towered airport, when the control tower is not operating, should monitor and communicate on the CTAF frequency when entering the traffic pattern. Pilots should use the CTAF to self-announce their position or intentions when entering within 10 miles of the airport and preferably at 5 nautical miles as well. Self-announcing should include aircraft type to aid in identification and detection, but should not use paint schemes or color descriptions to replace the use of the aircraft call sign. So blue and white Skyhawk is not recommended or sufficient enough. They're looking for tail number with the aircraft as well as the type of aircraft. When referring to a specific runway, pilots should always use the runway number and not use the phrase active runway. For example, when they land and they get off the runway, they shouldn't be saying clear of the active at Foxtrot. They should be saying clear of runway 26 at Foxtrot. To help identify one airport from one another, when sharing the same frequency, the airport name should be spoken at the beginning and at the end of the transmission. I like to describe it as bookend what you're about to say, who you are, where you are, and what your intentions are, and bookend it with the airport on either side of it. So per the AIM, pilots are reminded that the use of the phrase any traffic in the area, please advise, is not a recognized self-announcement position and or intention phrase and should not be used under any condition. Any traffic that is present at the time of your self-announcement that is capable of radio comms should we reply without being prompted to do so. The pilot in command's primary responsibility is to see and avoid other aircraft and to help other aircraft see and avoid his or her aircraft by proper communication. Pilots are encouraged to participate in Operation Lights On, a voluntary pilot safety program described in the AIM, where basically you keep all your lights on, particularly when you're in the traffic pattern or getting near the airport. Also be aware, no radio aircraft. Class G airspace and other airspace, there are possibilities that you'll have an old J3 Cub with no electrical system on board, no radios on board. So you always have to be on guard for that, particularly at these uncontrolled airports or non-towered airports that are in Class G airspace. So keep in mind, they're not going to show up in ADS-B necessarily either. So be vigilant outside the plane as well as listening, but remember that you may not hear anything in terms of radio calls or even ADS-B in traffic, because in certain airspaces you don't need to have ADS-B out. Pilots of inbound aircraft that are not capable of radio comms should determine the runway in use prior to entering the traffic pattern by observing the landing direction indicator, the wind indicator, landing and departing traffic, and previously referring to relevant air publications or by other means. So basically, anybody that's no radio operation should follow the flow of the traffic that's in the pattern, look at this windsock, etc., to determine the proper runway to land on. Going further into AC 90-66C 9.5.3, on the airport CTAP, you should communicate and coordinate your takeoff intentions with aircraft inbound in the traffic pattern and announce the runway to be used, the direction of flight and departure, and where you intend to remain in the traffic pattern. This includes touch and goes, stop and goes, landings, but always remember the acronym ANC, aviate, navigate, and communicate. Make sure you're flying that plane, you're going in the right direction, and then communicate your position or intentions. Again, the PIC's primary responsibility is to see and avoid other aircraft, to help other aircraft see and avoid you. Again, always keep your lights and strobes on, particularly when you're in a pattern or approaching the airport within 10 nautical miles of it. We'll talk a little bit about turning legs of the pattern. Turning crosswind. Airplanes remaining in the traffic pattern should not commence a turn to the crosswind leg until beyond the departure end of the runway and within 300 feet below traffic pattern altitude. Landing right-of-way. 91.113 provides details on right-of-way rules, including right-of-way when landing. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on that in a minute. But the bottom line message here is vigilance should be maintained by each person operating an aircraft so as to see and avoid other aircraft. All right, more on right-of-way rules, 91.113. Landing. Aircraft, while on final approach to land or while landing, have the right-of-way over other aircraft in flight or operating on the surface, except that they shall not take advantage of this rule to force an aircraft off the runway surface which has already landed and is attempting to make way for an aircraft on final approach. When two or more aircraft are approaching an airport for the purpose of landing, the aircraft at the lower altitude has the right-of-way, but it shall not take advantage of this rule to cut in front of another which is on final approach to land or to overtake that aircraft. In distress, an aircraft in distress has the right-of-way over all other aircraft in the traffic pattern. Overtaking aircraft. Each aircraft that is being overtaken has the right-of-way, and each pilot of an overtaking aircraft shall alter course to the right to pass well clear. Approaching head-on. When aircraft are approaching each other head-on or nearly so, each pilot of each aircraft shall alter course to the right. Converging aircraft. When aircraft of the same category are converging approximately the same altitude except head-on or nearly so, the aircraft to the other's right has the right-of-way. If the aircraft are of different categories, a balloon has the right-of-way over any other aircraft category. A glider has the right-of-way over an airship, powered air parachute, weight shift controlled aircraft, airplane, powered lift, or rotorcraft. An airship has the right-of-way over a powered parachute, weight shift control aircraft, airplane, powered lift, or rotorcraft. And lastly, an aircraft towing or refueling other aircraft has the right-of-way over all other engine-driven aircraft. I'm not going to go into detail on this chart, but the AIM 4-1-9 has advisory practices at non-towered airports. Again, this is not regulatory, but advisory. But again, it's all about being alert, see and observe traffic in the area, and the proper communication usage. So we'll move on. Again, per AC 90-66C, make radio calls at 10 miles and 5 miles, stating your position and intentions at that airport. Make your radio calls when you are on the 45 entry to the downwind or crossing over midfield for pattern entry. Make radio calls on the traffic pattern for all of your legs, your downwind, your base, your final, your crosswind. And if you've got ADS-B on board the aircraft, have it displayed on the GPS unit or on a paired iPad if you have it. But again, don't have your eyes glued to that iPad or that avionics, especially when you're in the pattern. Be looking out 80 to 90% of the time. And see section 91.225 if you want more information on ADS-B. Other recommendations for safe flight and pattern: again, display GPS unit in traffic only page to remove clutter when in the pattern. When you see the moving map page and you've got lots of things on that colorful moving map page, it can be difficult to see the traffic. So I like to just put the GPS unit in traffic only mode when I'm in the pattern. So that's all I see, the traffic around me and myself. If you're using an aftermarket ADS-B out product, make sure it is powered, such as you may need to have the nav lights on to power the sky beacon, for example. Do not enter a runway and wait for another aircraft to exit the runway. So be patient, let the person get off the runway before you come out in the runway. Again, wait for the landing traffic to clear the runway before entering the runway. After landing and clear of the runway, pass the hold short, announce you are clear of the runway, and again, say the runway number. This will signal the waiting departing traffic to enter the runway at that point. And lastly, wake turbulence. Pilots should be prepared to encounter turbulence while operating in a traffic pattern, especially when in the trail of another aircraft. Avoid the area below and behind the aircraft generating turbulence, especially at low altitude, where even a momentary wake encounter could be very hazardous. And I've personally been there, falling behind a 737 once. Basically the plane turned 90 degrees with the left wing dropping. It was nose down, full power, and some right rudder in there to get that wing back up on the left side. Avoid rotor wash, which results from the vertical downwash of air generated by the main rotors of a helicopter. Give plenty of lead time or spacing if a helicopter is coming in front of you. Give yourself 3 minutes or more before you approach that runway area where that helicopter had just came in for a landing, because it can be quite severe. Jet blast. Give yourself ample distance behind a jet when on the taxiway, the run-up area, or when in the traffic pattern, particularly in final. And I've had that situation happen to me as well. Jet's sitting there at the end of the runway ready to take off. I turn final. It may be a Challenger, a Global, or something that size. It's taking off. The rules are, you should land before they rotated so you don't get the wingtip vertices. But trust me, the jet blast is still sitting there a minute later. And when you get down into effectively ground effect, that jet blast that just occurred really can be very disruptive and difficult to control the aircraft. So those are the regulations and guidance for flying at uncontrolled airports. Hopefully you found this video helpful. And if you did, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you get notified on my next video.